Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Toto Wolff has revealed changes are necessary and are coming at Mercedes over this winter after their pit stops for the last couple of years have been way behind where they need to be to keep up with their rivals. Wolff reckons that in terms of preparation and science, they'll be making big changes to try and compete with the big dogs in Red Bull at the moment. Very much interested in your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I greatly appreciate it. Hope you all had a fantastic day. Yes, today is Boxing Day and it's also Adrian Newey's birthday, I believe. There was talks today about his future in the sport. I'm sure that many other teams would very much like to see Newey say, you know what, I've had enough of this, I'm going to step away and retire. Doesn't look like that's going to happen. Good news for Red Bull, not particularly good news for anybody else. The rumour is that he's not considering stepping away for now. I believe he turns 65 today, so theoretically he's got quite some runway still to go. Whether he'll stay around until, I wouldn't be surprised if he stays around until 2026, designs the aero for that set of regulations, because it's still going to be ground effect. We believe it's potentially going to be active aero. Very interesting ideas that are going around the moment with regard to the 2026 reg. So wouldn't be surprised if Newey kind of designs that and then maybe calls it a day in 3 or 4 years time. But for now, Red Bull still have the ace up the sleeve, no doubt about it. We'll get back to Red Bull in a few minutes time though. Some talking points though from Haas here coming out of Günther Steiner over the last couple of days. And I find this just so hilarious, unfortunately for Haas fans, if they're already watching. And, well, at least my perception on what Andretti might bring to the sport more so than Haas presently do from that American perspective. But Steiner says that there was no issue with budget this year. I think this was the issue with Haas and some other teams. Williams, for example, they never actually had the amount of money to spend the $145 million budget. I think it's now down to 135. Okay, there's some inflationary measures, this type of stuff, but that's the budget cap. Now, Haas got their new MoneyGram sponsorship thing, so that's enabled them to actually spend to the budget cap. The problem that Haas have had is not spending the money, it's finding performance, which is as tragic as it is kind of hilarious, because most other teams, they don't really have much issue finding some performance. It's a matter of, can they execute it? Do the parts they bring actually work and this type of stuff? But apparently, according to Steiner, Haas put their car in the wind tunnel, and the entire season of trying to find upgrades and ways to improve the car, everything they tried did nothing. So it was like, well, there's no point us producing upgrades if they're not going to do anything. Which just goes to show that their team, their engineering, and all these factors just is not where it needs to be. And I'm sure other teams, even Aston Martin, they brought upgrades. They didn't necessarily work, but at least I think Aston Martin thought they were going to work. They thought they were going in the right direction, and maybe they didn't understand something and they made some corrections and that was okay. But it's like, Haas couldn't even find anything they thought was going to work. So they brought one upgrade at the end of the year, and Hülkenberg didn't like it. He wanted to go back to the older version, and it seemed like on paper both versions were very similar indeed. So pretty shocking really from Haas's point of view that the top teams have no issue finding performance. It's often a matter for the top teams of, okay, we found this performance, but we've got the budget cap to factor in. How much do we really put into this set of upgrades? What about this set of upgrades? Is this going to be the biggest bang for our buck type situation? Haas don't even have the option for that because they can't find any performance. And then you still have Steiner saying that, well, next year we were last with this year, but next year we might be top of the midfield. I'm like, what is this guy smoking, right? But look, you can say this every year, it doesn't necessarily make it true. One thing that might be beneficial for Haas is if Ferrari are competitive, because we know that Haas will take as much as they reasonably can from Ferrari, as they always do. So Günther also said that he hopes Ferrari fight with Red Bull, because if they have a good package, that means we get a good package. So I don't know what these guys actually bring to the sport. Sure, there was some value. They've done well. Gene Haas has done well out of it, right, in terms of the valuation of the team now compared to when they came into the sport. But there's many that would say, is it just time to step aside for Haas, allow Andretti to buy the team, or is it time for them to actually make more investment so they can actually make this team a legit one? Because right now they're just perennially going to be at the back of the grid. Günther also did mention about the possibility of bringing more rookie drivers in over the next couple of years. We talked about Oliver Behrman, for example, but also Teo Pourchaire is a current Formula 2 world champion. He talked about this the other day and said that he reckons that he could match Piastri in the same car. So he's an exceptional racing driver, but I believe I am on his level. I just need an opportunity to get into Formula 1. I'm personally not so convinced, but it's what you'd expect the reigning F2 champion to say, based on, okay, last year's champ was Drugovich. He didn't get a seat. Year before that, Piastri, even Piastri, after the dominant season he had and was so impressive, he had to take a year out before he got a seat in McLaren. It was going to be Alpine, but we know, of course, how that ended. So we know it's difficult. There's been many questions lately. What actually is the point of Formula 2 if this is what happens as a result? Even Lewis Liam Lawson ride, went off to drive in Super Formula this year over in Japan, did very well out there, and now he's just effectively waiting around for a seat to open up in Formula 1. I would expect he's going to be back at Racing Bulls, AlphaTauri, potentially before the end of the season. There's been lots of rumours that, well, Perez, he's probably already gone. It's just a matter of time, and whether it's Ricciardo that comes in, and if it is Ricciardo, then of course that'll mean a seat is available at AlphaTauri, or it could even be Norris at some point, but that's probably a longer term thing because McLaren aren't just going to want to give that contract up for no reason, especially in the middle of a season. But let's talk about Mercedes though, because they've had lots of questions to answer lately, how they actually intend to challenge Red Bull next season. They've fired up their engine, by the way, so here you go. You've got a an open chassis. It's kind of funny, they always do these engine firing up videos for next year's car. Pretty sure they're the first team again to do this. They quite often are, Mercedes, the first team to get their engine sorted for the new year. There's been quite a bit of talk about their engine, the improvements they might make for next year's car, and also the packaging they're going to have on the new concept, which is going to allow them to generate more straight line speed. They're understanding more things about their engine, how to map it at higher rates without suffering from reliability issues, all this type of stuff. So they've fired their engine up. Of course, that's probably going to be a strong part of their arsenal, as it almost always is. But there's other things about their situation, Mercedes, that makes it very difficult to challenge Red Bull. Sure, maybe on a driver point of view, they're quite evenly matched in an equal machinery, but the machinery is not equal at the moment, and the strategy is not equal at the moment, neither is the operations. And this is where people are comparing Mercedes to Ferrari now. And you could argue that Lewis Hamilton, a set of medium tyres and a great car, has papered over the cracks at Mercedes for many a year. And now you take away the great car, and all of a sudden you start to realise, hang on a second, the strategy, the operations, all these other factors aren't going so well. Now, this is not a new story at Mercedes. Toto Wolff has said for, approaching a decade that the pit stops at Mercedes are sometimes something they need to work on, but it was definitely talked about this season, especially when McLaren have made big steps on their pit stops, setting the world record this season with a 1.80 second stop for Norris back in Qatar. Red Bull on average, of course, have the fastest pit stops by quite some margin, and Toto Wolff said the following: our mindset for the last 12 years was, we don't need to be world champions in the pit stops, we just need to avoid slow pit stops, and we'll see the evidence of that here in a second. But it is now coming to a situation where we realise that because it's become so competitive, we need to ramp up our game there. In terms of equipment and science around it, we'll be making a step up to be better than 3.5 seconds per stop. So this is a big focus point for Mercedes, and there was many races, such as even this year in Austin, where, Hamilton might have been a second and a half behind Verstappen at some point, but he actually ended up 3.5 seconds back because his pit stop was 2 seconds slower than what Red Bull did for their pit stop. And it's a massive deal. Like, it takes so many laps as a driver to catch up. Okay, a tenth this lap, 2/10 this lap, another tenth this lap. You can throw all that time away, all that hard graft from the driver and everything that goes into creating that performance in a very brief pit stop. Now, if your car is rapid, that's fine, but nowadays that's not the case. And as I say, this is not a new story at Mercedes. Even this is 2021 Mexico, when basically Toto Wolff said the Red Bull could have driven circles around us over the pit stops because they were just comfortably the better team during that Grand Prix. And when we saw the cars were equal, all of a sudden it was like, damn, Mercedes pit stops are going to cost them if they can't get this right. Now, as Toto Wolff says, Mercedes' strategy has been relatively clear. Let's have steady pit stops, but not especially fast ones. The problem for Mercedes is that they tend to just be quite slow, and you'd still get the occasional howler. And we'll see the data behind this in a second. This season, though, average pit stop time. Some teams that don't take it so seriously, such as Haas, 4.2 seconds on average. It's funny in a way that we don't often get to see Haas pit stops because they're usually not in a position to be relevant in the front running for the race. So I don't think we always get to see it be this bad. But for Haas, yeah, over 4 seconds is the average stop. Red Bull are on 2.6. That's their average. McLaren 2.9, Ferrari 2.9, Aston 3.1. So all the competitive teams are up here, but Mercedes are the slowest of all of them over 2023. And 0.6 of a second per stop to Red Bull, 2 stops a race. That's a second of race time per race. Let's say you have 2 stops, but that also means you come out behind a car you shouldn't. Now you've got to overtake them. You can't rely on a fast pit stop to get the move done, get the undercut done. So many times Mercedes might try and go for the undercut, but their pit stop is a second slower than the other guys. So the undercut doesn't even work because you just lose Hamilton or Russell a second on his outlap. This was the data during the 2022 seasons. This is after the French Grand Prix. This is only roughly half of the season, but kind of gets the point across in what we saw last year. Red Bull were fastest, then Ferrari last year, then McLaren. Now, what you do see here, as you see with Mercedes, they have a very tight spread. So their average after 12 races last year was a 3.2 second stop. Their fastest was a 2.5. Their slowest was still a 4.8, which isn't good, but it was a tighter spread than anybody else on the grid had. We can see here that Red Bull, even Haas, their fastest pit stop ever was like a 3.1, their slowest a 5.5. Red Bull though, and Ferrari and McLaren did have the occasional stinker. We saw that last year. Even it was Red Bull in was it Austin, right, where Verstappen had like a 10-second stop towards the end of the year. So it's possible they have howlers, but most of the time it's very fast, and we can see the evidence of that here, and McLaren over time have got much, much better even than just this over the last couple of seasons in terms of their consistency. Now, these numbers I think are a little bit higher than we might have even had this year, partially because I believe this data excludes some of the really slow stops, which is probably why we don't see them. So anything slower than like a 5.7 or whatever is not even counted in this analysis, which maybe is justified. But as you can see, the Red Bulls, their fastest is like 2.2, 2.3, and even this season they've gone much quicker than that, as certainly McLaren have, as we have seen in Qatar. Their slowest, though, is in this kind of ballpark, so there's a bigger spread, but this seems to be the go-to strategy. If you have a bit of a bad stop, is there that much difference between, a 7-second stop and a 6-second stop? But there is definitely a difference to be gained from a compounding perspective between a 2.5-second stop and a 3.2-second stop, for example. And that's what, Mercedes P6 on this analysis during last season. Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren, most of their stops are very fast. The occasional bad one is not ideal, but that still seems to be the better way to do it. Whereas Mercedes are kind of slow and steady, but they're just slow. And this is the problem that they run into. There's been multiple examples of this over the last couple of seasons. Now, there were rumours going around not long ago that there were some serious issues with their equipment, i.e. they hadn't updated their pit stop equipment in years. And this is the reason why they were slow. So maybe it's on both sides of it when they haven't taken their pit stop so seriously. They haven't created the environment where they're training hard. I mean, I think even last year, Ferrari said they were putting so much time into their pit stop practice to get significantly better. And even this season, for example, sure, on average, Red Bull are quite a way faster. But if you look at percentage of pit stops lower than 2.5, which is kind of like that Goldilocks zone target, really, Red Bull are getting 43% of the pit stops in that number. Ferrari aren't far behind. McLaren aren't far behind. Mercedes barely do any that are in that kind of ballpark. So, and obviously this doesn't really include 2.6-second stops, but it still gives you a good idea of where Mercedes are severely lacking at the moment. So whether it's going to be more training for the pit stop guys to get them up to speed, whether there actually are some equipment things, and as Toto Wolff said, scientific things, science they need to get right in order to take this to the next level. But I think it's quite clear that if you want to beat Red Bull right now, you're going to need to be on point all across the board. And Hamilton said this, it was, not long ago. It was Austin, really, where there were a number of examples of not great stops. And Toto Wolff did say at some point, all right, our pit stops are a focus, we've got to fix it. And the next Grand Prix, they did okay, it was a bit better. But it wasn't exactly great. And Hamilton even mentioned after this race that, yeah, our pit stops have got to be better. We need to level it up in that aspect. Because usually Hamilton finishes the race and says, oh yeah, good pit stops, boys. But I don't know if he ever really believes that, because he's getting a 3.5-second stop. And Verstappen and Perez are getting a 2.2, Norris is getting a 2.4. It's like, well, come on. So this is the issue that Mercedes have had, that 3.4-second stops, 3.6-second stops, it's just so costly. And if you don't have the performance advantage to make up for that, then you simply can't afford this to be the case. So lots of things for Mercedes to figure out. Fundamentally, build a good car. That's always the most important thing. Operations, strategy, even driver can come somewhat secondary if you have an absolute rocket ship. But if you don't have an absolute rocket ship, as they're not going to, at least when compared to Red Bull, it might be a quick car next year, the Mercedes. The Ferrari might be quick. The McLaren might be quick. But none of those cars are going to have a decisive performance advantage over the Red Bull if they even have a performance advantage at all, which they probably won't. So you need to be better in all other aspects, and Toto Wolff says we don't want to have a team of superstars, we want to have a superstar team. So that's one of his key focuses, I'm sure, because Toto Wolff has talked about this a lot for the last 2 years, so it's someone's responsibility to fix the problem, and maybe that is one of his key focus points over the winter. So very much interested in your thoughts in the comments below. Just one final cool thing I thought I'd mention here from F1 Fan 2004, put together a list of every current F1 driver's first test ever in F1 machinery. I'm not going to show you all of them, but just by comparison, it's kind of wild, right? That some of the guys on this list here, so we're talking Zhou, Piastri, Tsunoda, Sargent, they did their first test a good, couple of years really before they came into the sport in general. Not the case, for example, for Yuki Tsunoda, but you can see how it goes. But for some of those guys, they were not born when Fernando Alonso did his first Formula 1 test in 1999. Hamilton was the second most recent in 2004. Then it was Hülkenberg, then Ricciardo. But a big spread there, right? Just goes to show how long Alonso's been around, that he did his first test in F1 machinery in Minardi way before a few of our current drivers were even came into the world. So very much interested in your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.